Have you noticed something in the photograph of your loved one lately? Not in the memory you hold of them, in the photograph itself. A light that wasn't there before. A detail you're certain you never noticed, even though you've been looking at that same image for years. Or perhaps something even harder to put into words. The sense that something in that face printed on paper has quietly shifted, and you can't say when it changed or why it's happening right now, of all times. You're not imagining things. You're not losing your mind. What you're experiencing is something that happens in the days leading up to Palm Sunday. Something Saint Teresa of Avila described with a clarity it took the Church decades to fully understand. And it is directly connected to the soul of the person you love and miss so deeply. You're not the first person this has happened to, and it doesn't happen at just any time of year. It happens now, in these particular days, when Lent reaches its deepest point and Palm Sunday draws near, like a door about to open. There are families who have kept this silence for years because they had no words for what they were experiencing. They would sense something, feel something standing before the photograph of a person they had lost, and then let it pass, because no one had ever explained what it was. Because no one had ever told them that what appears in those photographs before Palm Sunday is not coincidence, not grief playing tricks, not a change in the light coming through the window. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about what happens to the souls in Purgatory during the days that lead up to the Passion of Christ. She wrote from the inside, from a mystical experience verified by the Church, from a certainty that was not her own, but God's. And what she left in writing answers precisely what you have been feeling without being able to name it. Stay with this. What comes next was placed here for you. There is something most Catholics don't know about Purgatory, and it's not for lack of faith, it's for lack of explanation. We are taught that Purgatory exists, that the souls there are being purified before entering heaven, that we should pray for them. But almost no one explains to us what that place is like from the inside. What it is like for the souls who are there. Whether it is a fixed, motionless, unchanging state, the same every day of the year, or whether something within it moves, breathes, responds to the sacred seasons that the living are passing through down here. Saint Teresa of Avila understood Purgatory in a way that very few mystics have ever been able to articulate with such clarity. Not as a cold, static place of punishment, but as a state of love in process. In her own words, Saint Teresa wrote in the interior castle that the soul journeying toward God is never still. That inner movement is the very sign that divine life is at work within it. And what Teresa said of souls still making that journey here on earth, the Church has understood as equally applicable to souls completing that journey in Purgatory. They are not frozen in place, waiting. They are alive in God's love, being purified, moving towards Him. And that movement does not occur in a vacuum sealed off from the liturgical seasons the Church is living out on earth. Here is the first truth you need to understand. The liturgical year is not simply a calendar of masses and feast days for the living. It is the rhythm of Christ's mystery unfolding through time, and that rhythm reaches the departed as well. When the Church enters Lent, when priests vest in purple, when the altars are stripped and the music grows quieter and more austere, something happens in the spiritual order that is not confined to parishes and the homes of the living. The souls in Purgatory feel that movement, not because they are bound to the human calendar, but because they remain united to the mystical body of Christ. And that body moves as a whole when the mysteries of the Passion and Resurrection draw near. The Fathers of the Church wrote at length about this communion between the Church triumphant, the Church suffering, and the Church militant. These are not three separate realities that coexist without touching. They are one single Church in three different states, and what happens in one resonates in the others. St. John Chrysostom, in his homilies on prayer for the departed, insisted that the suffrage we offer for the souls in Purgatory carries greater power during the strong liturgical seasons, not because God is more generous at certain times than others, but because the disposition of the living is more intense, more recollected, more oriented toward eternal mysteries, and that disposition opens channels of grace that remain more closed during ordinary time. And now comes the question you may already be asking yourself. If the souls in purgatory feel the movement of the liturgical year, if they are united to the mystical body preparing to enter the Passion of Christ, what happens specifically in the days before Palm Sunday? What takes place at that threshold where Lent reaches its point of greatest tension and Holy Week is about to begin? Do the souls feel that threshold in a particular way? And if they do, how can that movement reach the living who love them? The answer cannot be contained in a single phrase. But there is a path toward it, and that path begins here, with this first truth you have just received. Purgatory is not a sealed state. It is a living state, in motion, in relationship with the mystical body, of which those souls remain a part. And if that is true, then what you feel in these days, when you look at the photograph of your loved one, does not arise from nowhere. It arises from something real taking place in the spiritual order, something that has a cause, has a name, and has an answer. And you will come to understand it more fully as we go on. But before we continue, there is something you need to know, something that changes the way you will hear everything else. Purgatory is not far away. It is not in some remote corner of the spiritual universe where souls arrive and then lose all contact with anything and anyone until the moment they enter heaven. Purgatory exists, in the words of the Church's most authoritative theologians, in a real relationship of closeness with those of us who are still living. Not a geographical closeness, but a closeness of love. The souls in purgatory know us. They know who we are. They know we love them. And in those moments when God's grace permits it, that closeness becomes perceptible in ways that reason alone cannot explain, but that faith recognizes without difficulty. That is what you have been sensing when you stand before that photograph. It is not imagination. It is the edge of something real. And what that real something is asking of you is that you keep listening, because the truth that comes now is the one you most need in order to respond well to what you are experiencing. But to understand it, you first need to know how Teresa came to know all of this. And for that, we have to go back to the beginning of her love for the departed, to an early loss that shaped her spiritual journey in a way none of her biographers has ever been able to overlook. Because without that loss, without that child's grief, Teresa would not have sought God with the depth she did. And without that search, her words about love that survives death would not carry the weight they carry. The weight of someone who did not learn this from books, but from the lived reality of loss. Before Teresa of Avila was a mystic, before she founded convents and wrote treatises the Church would declare as doctrine, she was a little girl who lost her mother. She was 8 years old when Beatriz de Ahumada died, and Teresa, in the pain of that loss, went to kneel before an image of the Virgin Mary and asked her to be her mother. She tells the story herself in the book of her life with a simplicity that breaks the heart. A child of 8 who has just lost the person she loved most in the world, who doesn't know what to do with that emptiness, and who turns to the sacred for what the world can no longer give her. That experience marked Teresa for life, not sentimentally, but spiritually. From that early loss, she developed a particular sensitivity toward the relationship between the living and those who have gone, toward what it means to love someone who is no longer in the body, toward the question that everyone who has lost someone asks in silence, where are they now? Can they know I still love them? Does what I do here reach them at all? Teresa did not answer those questions in the abstract. She answered them through the mystical experience God granted her across decades of deep prayer. And one of the certainties she built, confirmed by her confessors and by the Church, is that love does not die with the body. The person you loved and lost is still that person. They still hold the memory of you. They are still in a real relationship with you, even though that relationship no longer passes through an embrace, a voice, or a physical presence. But there is something Teresa distinguished with a clarity her sisters in the convent heard with renewed attention each time she explained it. There is an enormous difference between the remembrance that prays and the remembrance that only weeps. Both are born of love. Both are understandable and deeply human, but only one of them does something concrete for the soul of the departed. When you stand before that photograph and let the grief wash over you and then move on with your day, you have honored your love, but you have not done anything that reaches the other side. When, however, you stand before that photograph and turn that moment into prayer, when you say to God from the heart, "Lord, for the love I have for this soul, have mercy on them," in that instant you are practicing the purest and most effective form of charity that exists. You are sending grace in exactly the direction that soul needs. Teresa pressed this point with her sisters in a way that sometimes made them uncomfortable because it touched something they preferred to leave unexamined. Love for the departed is not measured by the intensity of our tears, but by the steadiness of our intercession. And during Lent, and especially in the days before Palm Sunday, that intercession carries a particular power it does not carry at any other time of year. The Church has always known this. It is why the liturgical prayers of these weeks multiply prayers for the departed. It is why the Lenten Mass carries a special weight of suffrages, because these are days of greater openness to grace, of greater readiness in the human heart to receive eternal mysteries. And that openness does not benefit only the living, it benefits those who are waiting. And here something left, suspended earlier, comes full circle. Teresa did speak of the closeness of souls in the moments of greatest liturgical grace, not in a vague or poetic way, but with the precision of someone who experienced it herself and confirmed it in the lives of people she accompanied spiritually for decades. In The Way of Perfection, she wrote of intercession for the souls in purgatory as one of the most urgent acts of charity a person who loves God can perform, precisely because those souls cannot help themselves. They can only receive, and what they receive comes exclusively from the living who pray for them, from the masses offered in their name, from the small sacrifices and rosaries prayed with their name held in the heart. During the strong liturgical seasons, that channel of grace widens. Teresa lived this. She observed it in the people around her, and she passed it on as one of the most practically important truths of the spiritual life, not as a pious consolation, but as an operative reality that produces verifiable fruit in the eternal order. But the question that still lacks a complete answer is still there. If the channel widens, if souls are closer in these days before Palm Sunday, what specific forms can that closeness take for a living person who is paying attention? What exactly can be perceived, felt, noticed in a photograph? And how do you distinguish what comes from God from what comes from your own grieving heart, searching for signs where there are only memories? That distinction is fundamental. Teresa understood it better than anyone. And the answer she gave to that question requires first understanding what actually happens in the spiritual order in the exact days before Palm Sunday. Because this is not a diffuse phenomenon that unfolds in the same way throughout all of Lent. There is a moment of acceleration, a point at which the spiritual tension rises in a perceptible way. And that moment has a name, has a date, and has specific consequences for the souls who are waiting and for the living who love them. Palm Sunday is not the beginning of a week of solemn liturgy. It is a threshold, a break in sacred time where the ordinary ends definitively and what follows no longer allows for distance or lukewarmness. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey, while the crowd spread cloaks along the road and cried out, "Hosanna to the Son of David," he was not beginning a celebration. He was walking step by step toward the Passion. Every acclamation of the crowd was bringing him closer to the Garden of Gethsemane, to the betrayal, to the scourging, to the crown of thorns, to the cross. The people received him as a king. He walked as a lamb. And when the Church celebrates Palm Sunday, she is not looking back at that event from a safe historical distance. She is entering into that mystery. She is crossing the threshold alongside Christ. Liturgical time is not commemoration. It is real participation in the mystery that is made present. And that participation affects the entire mystical body without exception, the living and those who are waiting. Because the mystical body is one, even as it exists in three different states. In the days before that Sunday, something tightens in the spiritual order. It is as though the entire universe of grace gathers itself, draws breath, and prepares to enter the greatest mystery of the year. The saints who have lived Holy Week with the deepest mystical intensity describe this prior tension in remarkably similar ways, even though they lived in different centuries and different countries. Saint Faustina Kowalska described in her diary a particular spiritual density in the days before Palm Sunday that she found nowhere else in the liturgical year, a kind of weight in the air of prayer that she recognized as the mystery drawing near. Saint Pio of Pietrelcina experienced his stigmata with greater intensity during this period, as though his body was responding to the approach of the Passion before the calendar formally announced it. Teresa of Avila was no stranger to this. In the interior castle, she speaks of states of prayer that deepen without the soul seeking them, that arrive like visitors at moments God chooses and leave behind a certainty no rational argument could have produced. Some of the states Teresa describes in greatest detail occurred precisely during the Passion season. Not because Teresa manufactured them or waited for them impatiently, but because the mystery the Church was living in those days opened in the soul a special receptivity that God used to act with a depth that in ordinary times was not possible in the same way. Now then, if this occurs in the souls of the living who pray with depth during these days, if the most advanced saints in the spiritual life perceive that particular weight in the days before Palm Sunday, what happens in the souls in Purgatory? If the threshold carries a real spiritual weight that saints felt in their own bodies and in their own prayer, does that weight not also reach the souls in the process of purification? Does the mystical body split during these days with the living feeling the approach of the Passion, while the departed remain entirely unaware, as though sealed in a room where the mystery cannot enter? The Church's answer is no. There is no sealed room. The communion of saints is not suspended during Holy Week, it is intensified. And that intensification has concrete consequences for the souls in Purgatory and for the living who love them. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches in number 1032 that the Church has always recommended giving alms, indulgences, and works of penance on behalf of the departed. Not in generic moments, but with special urgency during the seasons of greatest liturgical grace, when the entire Church is oriented toward the mysteries that carry the most power to free and to purify. And what theology teaches as doctrine, the lived experience of many devout families has confirmed in ways that neither seek publicity nor spectacle, but that cannot honestly be denied. Families who in the days before Palm Sunday have noticed something different in the atmosphere of their home, a quiet they hadn't looked for, a dream that came without announcement and left a peace that lasted for days, a sudden certainty standing before the photograph of their loved one that this person was not as far away as the silence of death had led them to believe. But the central piece of all this is still missing. You still don't have the answer to the question that aches most, the one that the title of this video raises directly. What exactly appears? What is that something that shifts, or is perceived, or is felt in these days before the image of the person you loved. The tension is at its highest point, and what comes now is the answer Teresa left in writing. The answer the Church took decades to fully understand. The one that will change the way you look at that photograph from today onward. There is a passage in the book of her life by Saint Teresa that scholars of Carmelite mysticism have been citing for centuries as one of the most luminous in all of Christian spiritual literature. Teresa is speaking about love. Not love as a feeling or a passing emotion, but love as a real force in the spiritual order. Something with weight and consistency. A reality that cannot be destroyed by death because its origin is not in the flesh, but in God. In her own words, Saint Teresa wrote that true love, the love that is born of God, does not perish with the one who received it. It returns to its source and from there continues to act upon those who remained on earth, because God does not allow a single drop of the love set in motion by His grace to be lost. This sentence, simple as it appears, contains a truth that changes everything. The love you had for your loved one and the love they had for you did not disappear when they died. It did not evaporate. It did not go out in the moment the heart stopped beating. It returned to God, its source, and from God, it continues to act. It continues to be real. It continues to have direction and destination. And in those moments when God's grace opens that channel, in the moments of greatest liturgical grace, like the days before Palm Sunday, that love can make itself perceptible in ways that surpass rational explanation, but that faith recognizes without difficulty and without fear. And here is the answer to what appears in the photographs. It is not the image that changes. The paper does not transform. The ink does not move. What appears is not a phenomenon on the surface of the photograph, not a mark that takes on shape or a light that emerges from nowhere. What appears is a perception that God permits in the soul of the living person. An opening in your own interior that coincides with the approach of the Palm Sunday threshold, and that enables you to see that image with eyes that in ordinary days remain more closed. It is as though for a moment the membrane between the love that lives here and the love that waits there becomes thinner. And through that thinned membrane, something arrives that your heart recognizes before your mind can process it and classify it. Theologians would call this a spiritual motion. Teresa describes it in the Interior Castle as one of the ways God acts in the soul without the soul having consciously sought or prepared for it. It is not a vision. It is not a locution. It is not any of the extraordinary phenomena of mysticism that require special discernment and examination by a confessor. It is something simpler and deeper than all of that. A certainty that arrives, a recognition that does not have its origin in memory or imagination, a presence that makes itself felt, not as an apparition, but as love knocking from the other side of the door. And this happens before the photograph, specifically before the photograph and not somewhere else in the house, because the photograph is the point where your love for that person is most concentrated, not because the photograph has power in itself, not because the paper blesses, protects, or transmits anything by its own nature, but because you have placed there your memory, your tenderness, your quietest prayers. Over months or years, you have created in that place a space of love that in ordinary days remains still, but that in the days before Palm Sunday, when the entire mystical body is oriented toward the greatest mystery of the year, becomes especially receptive to what comes from the other side. Think of it this way. When someone you love knocks at your door, the sound of their knuckles on the wood is the same sound anyone would make, but you recognize it. Not because the sound is different, but because you are attuned to it. You have heard that knock enough times. Your heart knows it before your eyes open. That is exactly what happens before that photograph in these days. The soul of your departed loved one does not appear as a vision or a dream or a frightening phenomenon. it makes itself present the way a knock makes itself present, the way love calls to the love it knows is attuned to hear it in the moment when God, in His mercy, thins the membrane just enough for that call to come through. What appears in that photograph before Palm Sunday is the love of your departed loved one reaching toward yours. It is a soul that feels the approach of the mysteries of the Passion, and in that moment of maximum grace draws close to those still here, not to frighten, not to demand, to be near in the holiest moment of the year, to not cross the threshold of Palm Sunday alone, to ask you, in the only way it can from where it is, to carry it with you when you enter Holy Week, to let its name reach the foot of the cross as well. Now that you know what it is, the question that remains is what to do with it. Because love that recognizes a call and does not respond is love that stopped halfway. Knowing what happens is not enough. Spiritual knowledge that does not become action is incomplete knowledge. And Teresa of Avila said this with a directness that left no room for misunderstanding. Contemplation that produces no works is not true contemplation, but the illusion of it. If what you have heard so far has moved something in you, that movement is asking for a response. And that response requires nothing extraordinary, no unusual objects, no practices outside the Catholic faith, nothing a priest could not bless with his eyes wide open if he saw you doing it. The first thing you can do is so simple you may underestimate it because you were expecting something harder. Stop before that photograph. Not the way you glance at anything else in your home, but deliberately, consciously, as an act of love. Say to God, aloud or in the silence of your heart, the name of your loved one, just the name. No formula, no book, no special preparation, and then say from the heart, Lord, for the love I have for this soul, have mercy on them. That is a prayer without decoration, without elaborate language, without the polished words we sometimes use to keep the truth of what we feel at arm's length. Just a heart placing its most precious love in the hands of God. Teresa taught her sisters in the convent that the most powerful prayer is not always the longest or the most elaborate. In the way of perfection, she speaks of vocal prayer said with genuine attention as something capable of moving the heart of God in ways the most learned theological discourse cannot reach. A mother who prays the Our Father while thinking through each word, says Teresa, does more for the souls in purgatory than someone who recites the entire office of the dead with their mind somewhere else. The quality of attention is what determines the effectiveness of prayer. And before the photograph of someone you truly loved, attention comes on its own. You don't have to manufacture it. Just let it be there. The second thing you can do during these days is light a candle near that photograph. Not as a magical practice, not as if the candle had power in itself, or as if the flame were calling on something other than the presence of God, but as a sacramental gesture, a visible sign of the prayer you are lifting up, a quiet declaration that the memory of this person is still alive in your home and in your heart. The Church has an ancient tradition of lighting candles for the departed precisely because light is the symbol of life that continues, of hope that does not go out, of prayer rising like incense smoke to heaven. When you light that candle and pray, you are not doing anything esoteric. You are doing what millions of Catholics have done before you across 20 centuries, in what has produced spiritual fruit that only eternity will fully reveal. The third thing, and this carries a weight the other two cannot match, is to offer a Mass for that soul before Palm Sunday. Not after Holy Week is over, before. Because the days before that threshold are days of accumulated grace that the Church makes available to those who pray with intention. And the Mass is the most powerful suffrages that exists, the only one with infinite value, because it does not depend on the perfection or intensity of the one who offers it, but on the perfect priest who celebrates it. Teresa said that a single Mass offered with faith for a departed soul can do for that soul what years of other prayers, however sincere, cannot accomplish on their own. Not because those other prayers have no worth, but because the Mass is Christ Himself offering Himself, and nothing that comes from us can be equal to that. And there is something more, something that goes even deeper, and that requires no money, no travel, no special preparation. In these days before Palm Sunday, find a moment of quiet in your home, in the room where that photograph is, and sit down. You don't need to kneel if you are not able. You don't need words if the words won't come. Just sit with that image before you and allow the love you feel for that person to be your prayer. Teresa says in the interior castle that there are moments when the soul can do nothing more than simply be, and that this being in the presence of God with what we love most is, in itself, an act of adoration. Don't wait for the emotion. Don't seek the tears. Just be there and trust that God receives what you place before Him, even when you cannot find the words to express it. The soul of your loved one is near. You now know how to respond to that nearness, and the response you give in these days will not be lost. It becomes grace traveling in the right direction, arriving with the certainty of God's love exactly where it needs to go. Teresa of Avila did not speak of these things in the abstract. She did not build a desk-bound theology about the relationship between the living and the departed. She lived that relationship with an intensity that left concrete traces in her writings and in the testimonies of those who knew her. And she was a witness, not once but many times, to what happened in the lives of the people who applied these truths with faith and perseverance during the moments of greatest liturgical grace. In the Foundations, Teresa recounts with her characteristic sobriety the story of a woman in Toledo who had lost her husband suddenly without his having had time to receive the last sacraments. The woman was living in a deep anguish over the spiritual state of her husband, and that anguish had become, over the months, something that paralyzed her spiritually. She could not pray in peace. The fear for her husband's soul kept her from approaching God with confidence, because she felt that praying for him meant assuming the worst, and she was not ready to assume the worst. All she could do was weep and go silent. Teresa visited her in the days before Holy Week, and the first thing she did was not to console her with words or offer her theological arguments about God's mercy. She brought her to the chapel in her home, knelt beside her before a crucifix, and asked her to say her husband's name aloud, just once. The woman said it through her tears. And then Teresa asked her to do one thing, to take that name and hand it to Christ, to stop holding on to it, to stop carrying it alone, as though the eternal destiny of that man depended on the force of her own suffering. To trust that God's mercy was greater, infinitely greater, than anything she could imagine in her grief. What happened that night, Teresa describes, without adornment. It was not a vision. It was not a voice from heaven, not any extraordinary phenomenon requiring special discernment. It was a peace that descended on the woman suddenly, without anything external to explain it. A peace Teresa recognized at once as the characteristic sign of God's action in the soul, because that peace has a quality that cannot be manufactured or imitated. The woman said afterward that it was as if someone had lifted a weight she had been carrying since the day her husband died. The pain did not disappear, but the terror did. And in the place where the terror had been, something remained that the woman could describe in no other way than as the certainty that God knew her husband's name better than she did. Teresa did not interpret that moment as proof that the husband was in heaven. That was not a judgment she had any right to make. But she did recognize in that peace the sign that something had taken place in the spiritual order. That prayer had opened a channel that fear and paralysis had kept closed, and that placing a departed person's name before God with trust during the days of greatest liturgical grace produces effects that neither the one who prays nor the one who receives that prayer can measure with any human instrument, The doctrine of purgatory that Teresa transmitted to her sisters was not a doctrine of terror or dread. It was a doctrine of active love. Purgatory is not the place where souls suffer the abandonment of God. It is the place where they are loved by Him with an intensity that purifies everything. The suffering there is not the suffering of rejection, but of love that has not yet reached its fullness, like the pain the eye feels when it passes from darkness into very bright light. It is not a pain that destroys. It is a pain that transforms, that prepares, that refines the soul to receive a fullness its former state could not have borne. And the souls in that process are not alone. They are surrounded by the prayer of the Church. They are wrapped in the mercy of God. And in the days before Palm Sunday, when the entire mystical body orients itself toward the mystery of the Passion, that surrounding becomes more dense, more perceptible, more active, not only for the souls who are waiting, also for the living who love them and who in these days have been paying attention with an open heart. But there is still one question left unanswered, perhaps the one that weighs most heavily of all, because it is the most personal. Knowing that the soul of your loved one is near in these days, knowing that it draws close to the Palm Sunday threshold, knowing that your prayer can reach where they are, that is a great deal. But what should you specifically ask God during these particular days so that your prayer for that soul reaches the full strength this season of grace can give it? Are there words more effective than others? Is there a way of praying in these days that Teresa recommended in particular? There are days remaining, not many. Palm Sunday is near, and each day that passes between now and that threshold is a day that can be filled with a specific spiritual intention, one that produces eternal fruit. I am not speaking of extraordinary penances or practices that require special preparation or resources not everyone has. I am speaking of the ordinary done well, of the everyday consciously converted into offering, which is precisely the path Teresa pointed to for her sisters as the safest, most accessible, and most fruitful of all spiritual paths. During the first of these remaining days, dedicated to active remembrance, not the kind of remembrance that dwells in sadness and lets it grow without direction, but the kind that prays with what it has. Find a moment of quiet, even 10 minutes in the middle of a full day, and sit before that photograph with a rosary in your hand. You don't need to pray it all the way through if time doesn't allow, but pray at least one decade of the sorrowful mysteries, offering each Hail Mary consciously for the soul of your loved one, holding their name in your heart as you pray. That is enough for one day. That is more than many souls receive across whole months. And Teresa said that a single Hail Mary prayed with full attention for a departed soul carries, in the spiritual order, a weight that no human accounting can calculate. During the second of these days, do something Teresa considered one of the most powerful and most accessible acts of charity that exists for any person, regardless of their state of life or material circumstances. Offer a small discomfort for that soul. Don't seek out suffering or do yourself any harm. That is not what this means. But when that day brings a difficult moment, an unexpected weariness, a patience that costs you in a hard conversation, a small pain you would ordinarily push aside, take that moment in your hands and say to God consciously, "Lord, what this costs me, I offer for the soul of the one I love." Teresa taught that small daily sacrifices offered with awareness and love have an effectiveness in the spiritual order that is astonishing when held against their apparent insignificance, precisely because they are not spectacular, and for that reason, they are free of any search for recognition. During the third of these days, if you are able, go to confession. Not necessarily because you are in grave sin, but because confession opens in the soul a capacity for intercession that the ordinary weight of venial sin genuinely diminishes. Teresa explains this in The Way of Perfection with an image that stays with you. The soul in full grace prays for the departed with a strength the burdened soul cannot match, because grace flows without obstruction from a heart that has nothing blocking its passage. Confession before Palm Sunday is not only for your own spiritual good, it is also, and Teresa made this point clearly, for the good of those who depend on your intercession, for those who are waiting for someone in this world to pray for them with a heart that has no cracks or obstructions. And on the day before Palm Sunday, do something you may never have done deliberately and consciously before. Put the name of your loved one in the place where you will feel the mystery of the Passion most deeply. Write it on a piece of paper if you need the reminder. Carry it in your pocket when you go to the Palm Sunday Mass. Whisper it to yourself at the moment of the consecration. Because in that instant when the priest raises the body and blood of Christ, time breaks open in a way no metaphor can fully describe. The sacrifice of Calvary is made present in an unbloody manner on the altar. And what you bring to the foot of that altar in that moment receives the weight of Christ's passion. It receives the infinite value of the one sacrifice that has the power to save. Nothing you can do for a departed loved one throughout the rest of the year carries the value of what you can do in that precise moment. Teresa knew this. It is why she insisted that the Mass is not a commemoration, but a participation, not a memory, but a real entry into the mystery that saves. And if, in that moment, you carry the name of the one you love, that name enters the mystery with you. No one else can carry it with the same intimacy that comes from having known this person, from having held them, from keeping their photograph in your home, and from having felt in these days something you didn't know how to name, and that you now know is love reaching for love from the other side of the threshold. The question that opened at the beginning of everything you have heard is nearly answered. But what remains is the most important part of all, because it is not information. It is a certainty that Teresa built across decades of prayer and of accompanying souls, and that has the power to change not only how you live these days, but all the days that remain to you. Now you know. What appears in the photographs of your departed loved ones before Palm Sunday is not a supernatural phenomenon in the sense that fear would give that word. It is not an apparition requiring an exorcism. It is not a sign that something bad is coming. It is not a warning of danger, not a coded message to be deciphered in terror, not a call to turn to anything outside the Catholic faith. It is none of those things. It is love. Love that has not died because it could not die. Love that returned to its source and from that source continues to act in the direction of those who remained here. Love that in the ordinary days of the year stays quiet, deep beneath the surface, like a river running underground, without those walking above it being able to hear it. But that in the days before Palm Sunday, when the entire mystical body orients itself toward the greatest mystery of the year, rises to the surface, becomes perceptible, knocks from the other side of the door with the particular tenderness of love that knows time is short and this is the moment. Teresa of Avila spent decades understanding this truth, building it piece by piece through prayer, through loss, through accompanying souls, through mystical experiences God granted her that she examined with an unflinching honesty before passing them on. And what she understood at the end of all that process was this: the love that binds the living to the departed is not an obstacle to the spiritual life. It is not something to be overcome or left behind in order to grow closer to God. It is one of the most powerful channels through which grace can move, if that love is rightly ordered. If it does not stay in the weeping but becomes prayer, if it does not stay in the memory but becomes intercession, if it does not stay in the photograph but uses it as a point of departure for reaching God. What you felt before that photograph in these days did not reach you by accident. Nothing in the order of grace reaches us by accident. It reached you because you are the person closest to that departed soul in this moment. it reached you because you carry their memory with more love than anyone else, because you have their image in your home, because in these Lenten days, you have been more open than usual to what comes from the other side of the visible. It reached you because God, in His mercy, wanted something in you to awaken in these exact days before Holy Week began, and to look in the right direction, not with fear, with love, with the eyes that love has when it is ready to see. And now that you are looking in that direction, what you see does not frighten, it brings peace. Because what lies on the other side of that photograph is not the absence of the one you loved. It is their presence, transformed, their love purified by the process God has chosen for them, their hopeful waiting, not the waiting of abandonment, but the waiting of fullness. Like the waiting of one who is about to be born and cannot yet imagine the light that is waiting on the other side. And you can shorten that wait. With every prayer said with attention, with every Mass offered in their name, with every small sacrifice consciously given to God on their behalf, with the simple gesture of carrying their name to the foot of the cross on Palm Sunday, with the confession that clears your heart so that your intercession flows without obstruction. All of that reaches them. All of it produces fruit in the eternal order that no eye has yet seen, but that faith sees with a clarity that needs no proof. Do not let these days pass. Do not let them pass by looking at that photograph from a distance, doing nothing with what you feel, not converting that love into the most concrete act of love that exists. Prayer for a soul that needs you. That soul is near, nearer than it has ever been in these days of grace. And what you do here on this earth in these few remaining days before the threshold of Palm Sunday carries an eternal weight that will only be fully revealed when you too have crossed that threshold and see, face to face, all that well-ordered love was capable of producing. That is what appears in the photographs. That is what Teresa knew. And now you know it too. And knowing it makes you responsible for responding. You have stayed with this all the way through, and what you received was not information. It was a truth that has been waiting for you, preserved in the writings of a woman who understood love and death with a depth no human loss alone could have given her, because that depth came from God. The truth that the love you have for your departed loved one is not a burden you carry alone in silence. It is a channel through which God's grace can move if you open it with prayer and orient it with faith toward where that love needs to go. The truth that the souls in Purgatory feel the rhythm of the liturgical year, that they are not in a sealed, static state, but alive in God's love and moving toward Him, and that in the days before Palm Sunday, that movement accelerates and draws them closer to those of us still here in a way that an open heart can perceive. The truth that what you have felt before that photograph is not imagination, not grief in disguise, not your mind playing tricks. It is the edge of something real. It is love reaching for love from the other side of the thinnest membrane that exists, the one that separates those already on the path of purification from those of us still walking down here. And Teresa of Avila, who lost her mother as a young child and spent decades building from that grief an understanding of love that survives death, gave you today the words you have long been searching for without knowing it, words that do not frighten, words that do not confuse, words that orient and console and call you to act with love, because the time is short and these days of grace do not come again. What you do with those words from this moment on belongs only to you and to the love you carry for the one who has gone ahead. But you can no longer say you didn't know. You now have a name for what you felt. You have the answer, and that answer asks nothing of you that you cannot give. There is something that happens inside the soul during Holy Week that very few Catholics fully understand, and that Teresa of Avila lived and described with an honesty that still surprises those who read her for the first time. She was not a woman who dressed up her spiritual experience to make it more presentable. She did not hide the fear. She did not pretend that everything was peace and light from the first moment of every Holy Week she went through. She described what actually happens when a soul that loves God sincerely enters the holiest days of the year and suddenly feels the ground shifting underfoot in a way it doesn't know how to read, whether it is God drawing near with an intensity the soul cannot yet sustain, or whether it is God keeping a silence that hurts more than any word. That silence Teresa describes, that moment when prayer seems to leave the lips and hang in the air without going anywhere, when the most sacred rites of the year are celebrated in all their beauty and weight, and the heart of the one participating remains closed without knowing why or how to open it, is something you may have experienced yourself in some past Holy Week without ever finding the words to describe it. The sense of walking into the Holy Thursday Mass with an expectation you don't quite dare to name, and of walking out feeling something didn't move the way it should have, of hearing the full Passion proclaimed on Good Friday with open eyes and a heart at a distance, unable to cross the last few steps that separate you from the mystery being proclaimed, of waiting for the Easter Vigil, certain that this year will be different, that the Alleluia of the Resurrection will ignite something in you that has been cold for a long time, and then feeling the joy arrive for everyone around you, while it only grazes you without quite coming in. If you have ever felt that, you are not alone, and it is not a sign that your faith is weak or that you have done something wrong. It is a sign that the mystery of Holy Week is so great that the human soul cannot take it in fully without preparation, without someone showing it from the inside what it is about to experience and how to be ready to receive it with an open heart. Teresa of Avila did not only live that silence, she passed through it. She found the way out from within, not from outside, not through argument, but through a surrender she learned to make year after year, until Holy Week was no longer something she endured with difficulty, but became the moment of the year when the soul recognized itself most completely and recognized God most completely. And the way out that Teresa found, that path from a closed heart to a heart able to receive the full weight of the Passion and the Resurrection without being broken by it, is not a secret reserved for mystics or for those with an extraordinary spiritual life that most people cannot reach. It is a path that anyone who loves God with the sincere and real faith with which you love Him can walk, if someone shows it to them clearly and with the love of one who has already walked it before. That path is waiting for you now in what comes next, and what Teresa has to say about what happens inside the soul during the holiest days of the year, about the silence of God and what it means, about the spiritual dryness of Holy Week and how to turn it into the greatest door that exists rather than the wall it can sometimes seem, can change forever the way you live these days. Not only this year, every year that remains to you. Because once you understand from the inside what is happening, Holy Week is no longer something you endure. It is something you enter, truly, with your eyes open, with your heart ready, with the name of your departed loved one in your pocket, and the certainty that the love you carry will arrive, by the grace of God, exactly where it needs to go. Don't let this Holy Week pass without hearing what Teresa has to say to you. What comes next is for you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for having carried with you, in the quiet of your own heart, the name of the one you love, and for letting this time be for that soul as well, the one waiting in the hands of God. It is not a small thing you have done today. It is one of the greatest acts of love that exists, because it came from a heart that didn't have to do anything at all, and yet chose to stay, to listen, to learn to love someone better, someone who can no longer ask anything of you, but who needs you more than you know. In her own words, Saint Teresa wrote that the soul that truly loves does not rest until all those it has loved are where they are meant to be. Let that describe you in the days ahead. Do not rest until you have carried that name to the foot of the cross, until you have placed it in the hands of Christ at the moment of the consecration, until you have given that soul the most precious thing you can give them in this world, which is not your grief or your longing, but your prayer and your faith. And may the peace of God, that peace which does not depend on things going well, or the pain being over because it does not come from the world but from the very heart of God, go with you from this moment and hold you in every step you take toward the threshold you are about to cross. May Palm Sunday find you with an open heart and the name of your loved one ready to be offered. May God bless you and keep you.